Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that encourages good discussion in our community on today's local and global issues. Now, your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, author, professor, and nationally known sports economist, Dr. Kevin Quinn.
Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College. I'm Kevin Quinn. Our special guest is Andrew Brandt, and we will discuss the business of sports. Brandt, ESPN's NFL business analyst and full-time lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School, teaching negotiations and sports law, is also a regular columnist for the website he helped create, the National Football Post. His columns are a must-read for NFL owners, executives, and thousands of football fans everywhere. In addition, he writes columns for Huffington Post, Forbes, and the Sports Business Journal, and is a sought-after speaker on business issues in sports. After attending Stanford University and Georgetown University Law School, Brandt worked for ProServ Inc., representing top athletes such as Michael Jordan and Boomer Esiason. He then became general manager of the Barcelona Dragons in the NFL's World League. Following the World League, Brandt returned to player representation, representing NFL players including Matt Hasselbeck, Adam Vinatieri, and Ricky Williams. Brandt joined the Green Bay Packers in 1999. As vice president, he negotiated all player contracts, managed the NFL salary cap, and handled football operations. He left the Packers in 2008 following their hosting of the NFC Championship. Andrew, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Kevin. Good to be here.
Well, I think probably a lot of the folks who are watching right now already know you and know your name, but tell us a little bit about how you got to the Packers.
I was an agent, so I switched sides. I went from labor to management. So I was representing in two different times in my life, represented players, one for a group called ProServ out of Washington, D.C., which really made its name in tennis, and then got involved in basketball. I worked for a guy named David Falk, as you mentioned, represented Michael Jordan, some of the big names in the NBA. He gave me a real opportunity to develop a football practice, which he was more basketball related. So got involved with that, represented about 20 football players. At that time, I made my first move from labor to management. That was with the NFL's World League, a team called the Barcelona Dragons, where I went over and developed a new team and introduced a new sport, because over there they think football means soccer, so that was certainly a challenge in itself. And after that, came back and represented players for a company called Bob Wolf Associates up in Boston. And there I was representing a lot of players, including Matt Hasselbeck here at the Packers, and the biggest name I had there was Ricky Williams. I was going to continue on as an agent with Ricky Williams, but he decided to make a change, went with a guy named Master P. And at the same time, the Green Bay Packers were calling and wondering about me switching sides, coming here. Mike Holmgren had left for Seattle, took a guy named Mike Reinfeldt with him. I had dealt with the Packers on a few players. My first comment to Ron Wolf was, why me? You know, well, you deal with so many other agents. And he just said that I had a nice way of dealing with people. I seemed to know my way around the cap and know my way around dealing with agents. They wanted to bring in an agent to deal with agents. And that's how I got here in 1999. And it was a change in sides, obviously, going from the player side to the team side. But really, the basics of what I did didn't change a lot. I was negotiating contracts for one side, trying to get the best deal possible, trying to work with the other side to make sure it's good for the player and good for the team. Obviously, I didn't have any recruiting responsibilities like I did as an agent, going out and chasing these guys, but it was a seamless transition in from the player side to the team side here in Green Bay.
I would imagine that's the toughest part about being an agent, is finding athletes to represent. I've heard you say that it's sort of a shark tank.
Yeah.
How do you land a quality athlete that's likely to go places?
I think any agent looks for whatever hook, I like to call it, they can find, any relation. I think your biggest asset as an agent is always your clients. So you have other players talk to other players about, hey, you should sign with this guy, he's a good guy. You know, Matt Hasselbeck, who I mentioned, was here. He helped me a lot with other players at Boston College, other players at quarterback positions. So you use that what you can. As you mentioned, as I mentioned, it's such a competitive field. And the problem is, like any business, you have so many people trying to get the business and so few that give you the business. So you have hundreds, literally hundreds of agents trying to sign football players. And on the college level, of the ones who are going to make a difference financially, you're really talking about maybe 50 to 100. So it's hundreds after that 50. And that makes for some possibilities for unscrupulous activities. It just makes for a tough business trying to get the attention of these guys. And often what you see is you have players that come in as low-round picks or mid-round picks with an agent that's kind of a young, developing guy. And by their second or third year in the NFL, if they've had some success, they tend to switch to bigger firms. You really empathize with the smaller agents that have that happen to them, but you see a lot of switching going on.
Well, it's an interesting thing for a college football coach or basketball coach. On one hand, you get recruits by promising a shot at the NBA or NFL, and maybe you can point to the players that you had. On the other hand, you probably don't want the agents too close. I mean, first of all, NCAA rules are pretty clear about that, and from what I can tell, it's quite the little dance that occurs. So I'm sure that just trying to get on campus and without getting thrown off is probably one of the hardest things.
I think what you see in any business revolving around sports is it's all about the players. Coaches can do so much, agents can do so much, general managers can do so much, financial guys can do so much, but ultimately it is about the players, and that explains why they have so much leverage in who they choose to go with as an agent, leverage in which college they choose, leverage in which coach they'll play for, leverage in money and financial negotiations. But ultimately, when we get down to sports, we, meaning everyone who writes about it, teaches about it, talks about it, negotiates contracts, represents them, are just the periphery. It's all about the players, and that's why the players have the leverage in these situations.
When we think about recruiting here for St. Norbert or any other college, we have all these ideas about why this school is wonderful and that school is wonderful, et cetera, and it means something to us. But we're talking about 17-year-old kids making these decisions often. And I would imagine it's the same kind of thing. You're talking about athletes that have had people telling them what to do for a long time, that have pretty much gotten whatever they've wanted, and maybe one of their first adult decisions that they have to make is choosing an agent.
Yeah.
That I'm guessing they're making that on the basis of things other than sound business judgment in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, when I recruited players, and even when I dealt with players from the Packers, I always wanted to see a support system around the player. Whether that was a father, whether it was an uncle, whether it was a coach, whether it was a wife that really had a good head on her shoulders, or girlfriend. You felt so much better when you had that. When you saw a player kind of on his own, guys that really weren't looking out for his best interest, agents hanging around with other agents, with other people, with hangers-on, that's when you worried. And I remember bringing players in my office at the Packers saying, do you have someone looking out for you? I mean, not just your agent. Do you have someone in your corner? And oftentimes they didn't. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating seeing that, where they're going to hang around with somebody, and you just hope that somebody has their best interests at heart. What we'd have often in Green Bay, you'd have players moving up here that didn't know Wisconsin, didn't know what, and they'd bring up people that maybe were in their hometown or something like that. Some good, but some bad. And we'd get calls from police that guys got in trouble, not because of them, but because of the guy they brought up here that's not even playing for us, that's just hanging around and nothing to do.
Yeah, Jerry Perrins, the former security officer for the Packers, wrote a book that, I don't know if it was a tell-all book, but it was a tell-a-lot book. And if anybody's read through that, they would realize that, that's what teams spend a lot of their time doing, is trying to keep their guys out of trouble. I mean, these are athletes that some are well prepared, but often they're not. So I'm sure that most of the people watching here have seen Jerry Maguire. And I'm guessing that the real life of an agent is a little different.
Yeah.
What does an agent do most of the time?
Well, it's interesting. The uptick in interest in being an agent really surged after Jerry Maguire. And I think that movie was spot on for a while. Then it turned into, Tom Cruise love story. So that's what the masses wanted. And I'm anxious to see Moneyball, because I hear that's pretty spot on, even despite the fact that they want people to go because it's Brad Pitt in it. But it's obviously, it really captures it, is what I heard. Agents' job are threefold. One is negotiating the contract, dealing with the team, having a good relationship, being able to negotiate something that gives a player long-term security, hopefully gives them an opportunity to be a free agent, gives them an opportunity to get their maximum earning potential. Secondly, of course, you'd like to be involved in financing in terms of creating a model for them to save their money. I always told players, football's got a head start on your career. It's not your career. So use it as a nest egg to get the rest of your life going. It's very hard. I mean, it's the hardest thing of being an agent is controlling spending. And the third part is trying to get some marketing going, get some endorsements. You know, for the average player, it's tough. You hope for a shoe deal. You hope for a ball deal. You hope for a sweatsuit deal. But for the bigger names, obviously, you're looking for the two categories, the tools of the trade categories, which are the Nikes, Reeboks, Adidas, Under Armour, and then, of course, the non-tools of the trade categories, anything from cars to fast food to beverages, McDonald's, all those kind of deals. And again, depending on the caliber of your player, you can make a lot of money on the off-field stuff, but probably football is one of the least you can do that. It's more the individual sports, the sports where you don't have a helmet, like basketball, baseball, tennis, things like that. So those are the primary jobs of an agent, but as we just talked about, taking up more time than any of that is the recruiting, trying to build a pipeline of players coming in. And there you're spending most of your time in the fall and early winter trying to convince guys on college campuses that you're the guy for them over the hundreds of others trying to make the same case. So recruiting is, you know, people ask about my switch from labor to management, from player to team. The negotiating side, on the player side, was probably 30% of what I did. On the team side, it was probably 70% of what I did. But not having that recruiting responsibility obviously makes it a huge difference.
Well, we're going to talk in a moment about your time with the Packers, but you had a very interesting experience before you joined the Packers, which was with the World Football League.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the World Football League and what you did.
I was negotiating a contract for a guy named Chris Dolman with the Minnesota Vikings, and the head of the Vikings at that time was a guy named Mike Lynn, who was also starting the World League, and he said, you know, come be one of my young new general managers, and we're starting a team in Barcelona, Spain. And I said, okay, and I decided to do it. I had no wife and kids, and I moved to Spain, and it was quite an experience. I mean, we were 40 Americans over there trying to play football. They had no understanding of the sport. They cheered at the wrong times. They did the wave the entire game long. Our first touchdown was a beautiful seam pattern, 70 yards, and we got polite applause. And then our kicker kicks the extra point, and they go nuts. And so that's just the kind of understanding they have of the sport, which is totally around soccer. They couldn't understand why we huddled. They couldn't understand the stoppages all the time. So, I mean, we were a unique item. We had to put end tables with pillows at the end of each bed so their feet didn't flop over. We never got enough food. They'd never seen this many black people. They were like this. We were a phenomenon over there. I did it 2 years, and again, we never really got the attention of fans on a football side, but they loved the marketing side. They loved American music, American bands, and we had cheerleaders. We did the whole thing, and they really bought into that. But as you know, the World League came back as the NFL Europe with Barcelona for a while, but then they moved to mostly German and London teams, and Barcelona kind of fell by the wayside. But that was, as they say in the Army commercial, it was not just a job, that was an adventure.
And the bullfights at halftime tear the field up pretty badly, I'm guessing. Well, it was an interesting experiment, and it makes sense when you think about what baseball has done and basketball to make their brands more worldwide. Football remains uniquely American. Yeah. Is there any shot for it to really grow and jump the pond?
I think it's very similar to us talking about soccer here. Soccer has caught on to an extent here, and MLS games, we've been to a few. They're fun, they're exciting. But in terms of taking that foothold, it's hard. And it's like football in overseas, American football. It's fun, it's exciting, it's diversion, but it's not soccer. And I think there are a lot of parallels there. We sort of grew up with American football. They grew up with soccer. Soccer means everything to those countries in the way that our Packers and our teams mean everything to us. So in terms of American football taking hold, the NFL is committing to at least one, maybe 2 games overseas, which is great, but I don't see much of an imprint beyond that.
The Super Bowl seems to get attention as an event similar to the way the World Cup here is an event. Here on a college campus, I see young men and women, but mostly young men, that are beginning to become knowledgeable about the English Premier League and the Champions League, et cetera. But, I mean, let's face it, the football runs the show.
Yeah, I mean, I see people that follow those games overseas, and it becomes a passion. But again, it's beyond American football.
Well, you know, I think one of the things that's unique about the Green Bay Packers is their ownership model is much more like what the European soccer teams used to be. Now that's changing too as the TV money has come in there. You're starting to see sort of classic American style ownership of some of those teams. And you're also starting to see some fabulously rich people that use it as a hobby, which is maybe that was true here as well. You're watching Conversations from St. Norbert College. Joining us is Andrew Brandt, and we're talking about the business of sports. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your wonderful run with the Green Bay Packers. You were the capologist.
Right.
What does a capologist do for a living?
It's a hard thing to understand for a lot of people, but in a basic sense, I'm responsible for player payroll. And in any organization in pro sports, that's the highest expense you have. It's player costs. So my time here from 1999 to 2008, I managed anywhere from $95 million to $150 million of payroll per year. So you have 60, 70 players, depending on how many players are in reserve, and you're trying to keep that in terms of a budget, in terms of under the cap, which is a whole thing, and you're doing all the player contracts, which could be 50 to 100 a year, and you're staying under the cap, and you're trying to fit in everyone. The tough thing about the cap, oftentimes it's money in, money out, so you have to make decisions on who comes in and who comes out. I always looked around when we were bringing in players, whether through the draft or free agency, and I would ask our general manager, who goes? Now, I understand who's coming in, but who goes out? Because then you'd have to manage the fallout from that. You try to create a team that can win for the present and the future. I've talked a lot about how Brett Favre's contract always gave us temptation to do what a lot of other teams did, which was take a big salary. At those times he was making $10, $11, $12 million a year, turn it into bonus, which you can then prorate out and have unamortized charges later in your deal, but have a much lower cap number then. Then you could bring in more players, have a much more flexibility that year. I tried to guard against that because I always felt that I didn't want to be in a position to leave the team after Favre with an ability to not sign players. And we saw this with other franchise quarterbacks leaving, whether through retirement or free agency or trade, like a Steve Young, like a Steve McNair, like a John Elway, Troy Aikman. I didn't want to put the team in that position. So we sort of managed Favre's contract the way we did and always had flexibility. We needed to have a team in place that could compete after Brett Favre, and that was important to us.
Well, you must have been doing something right, because if I'm right about this, during your tenure, the Packers had the highest winning percentage of any team in the NFL. So you must have been doing something right there. And part of it is, I'm guessing, not giving $100 million contracts to players who wind up in jail or that. I mean, you can't maybe manage injuries very much, but you guys did a great job of making sure that you always had somebody to replace whoever it was that might be on the way out.
Yeah, and that credit really goes to personnel. I worked under Ron Wolf and Ted Thompson. Those guys are very great about having someone in the pipeline, always ready to go, trusting the scouting department. Even you look at last year here in Green Bay. I wasn't here, obviously, but Ryan Grant goes down the first game. I was at that game in Philadelphia. He's out for the year, and clamoring, I know from following it nationally, clamoring for, you got to sign a veteran runner, you got to sign Marshawn Lynch, you got to sign this guy, that guy. Packers stuck to their scouting, stuck to their board, had a guy who was injured at the time named Starks, and figured he'd be a pretty good back. So that's the kind of trust that you need from your scouting. And from a financial point of view, you'd rather have the pipeline fill those needs rather than going out and spending a lot of money on someone who may just be a short-term fix. So everything goes hand in hand, and the team's been very successful before I came, while I was here, and now since I've been here, in identifying talent and keeping them together.
It's not just in baseball. If you give an average general manager, I think, $200 or $220 million, they're going to put a winning team on the field. It's almost hard not to.
Yeah.
But in football, it truly is a more level playing field. You can get creative, as I understand it, with how you structure contracts, et cetera. But over a long period of time, you really have to bet on the right players and bet on, especially once they get out of their indentured servitude, when they become free agents. How did you decide who was going to stay and who was going to go? How did you guys make that decision?
Yeah, I mean, that's a concerted effort between management, coaching, and contract management, where the evaluators give their opinions, coaching gives their opinions, and then we see what we can do financially. We look at young players during my time here. You see a player, pick a name like Donald Driver. We say, this is an ascending young guy. We brought this guy in as a 7th-round pick. We brought in bigger, stronger, faster receivers, and he seems to outlast them all. He's small, he's frail, but he never gets hurt. And you see the longevity there. And we say, let's make a bet with this guy. Let's go to him before his contract's even up and try to make a bet and give him the contract he deserves. Now, again, when you're going to a guy before you hit free agency, you're not buying what I call retail. You're doing a contract that reflects the discount of going to them early in their contract. And we did that. And sometimes players get upset later on saying, hey, the market's passed me by. And you say, whoa, you were happy when you signed this. And that's the constant challenge for all teams. Every team has those issues. So when you hear about players upset, wanting new contracts, it's part of the game. You understand it. You have a roster of 70 guys. You know you're going to have 2 or 3 a year. They're not going to be happy, and you just try to deal with them in the best way you can. And we're pretty successful with the Packers. We had our share of discord, with, in my time, Mike McKenzie, Javon Walker. But you work it out, and you make sure that it doesn't affect the whole locker room.
Well, one of the things that I think has been an issue for the NFL has been the rookie contracts and that disparity. Now, the new NFL labor agreement does seem to tone that down a little bit. All right, here we are. It's in the past. We have a 10-year deal. What's your take on this deal? I guess that a lot of people know you through the National Football Post, where your writing on that is outstanding.
Thank you.
It's an online website. If anybody wants to really know what's going on, they should check that out. But for those that maybe aren't as familiar, what were the issues that were involved, and how does the new deal change things going forward?
Well, I think it boils down to me to one word on both sides, and that word is risk. The owners wanted to protect their risk of putting on these games, running these teams from February to August when there are no games, trying to protect the risk they have. So they wanted a better revenue share. They didn't want a 50-50 split. Players had to take a little less than 50-50. It came down to, depending on the year of the next 10 years, it'll be 46.5% to 48% for the players, and 53.5% to 52% for the owners. And that's a lot of money. Those percentage points are worth like $100 million a year. So that's a lot of money. The owners got that. They solved their risk equation by taking a little more from the players' share, a little more for them. On the players' side, their risk seemed to function around non-economic issues, around health and safety. And we're going to see a lot less practice time, a lot less off-season time, a lot less padded practices, a lot less hitting, all in theory to create more longevity for these guys and to keep them fresher and have less players in injured reserve, less players with head injuries, less players with debilitations later in life. That was their goal, and they accomplished that. I think from a pure economic sense, the players were not able to keep what they had, but going in, we knew they wouldn't. And from a health and safety area, the players got a lot of gains. In terms of looking deeper into it, I think I was hoping on the players' side that they'd get team spending minimums, not just league spending minimums. So teams, pick whatever team you say is not the Bengals, whatever people think of. They have to spend. Right now they don't. But by 2013 they will. So 2011, 2012, no team spending requirements. 2013, yes. So we'll see where that goes. Other issues, the players made a big issue about Roger Goodell should not have power to discipline us and be the appeals. So in other words, you give him a fine or a suspension for being a bad person off the field. He appeals. It goes right back to the commissioner. That didn't change. We heard that was going to be a big issue. That didn't change. That's still the case. And then the last thing I'll say about it is there are all these kind of issues done at the last part of it, the horse-traded issues, where we still don't know about HGH testing. We still don't know if players are going to be disciplined for lockout conduct. We still don't know fully about these minimum spending requirements. So, like a draft pick, you wait a few years to say if it was good or bad. We'll wait and see on this deal. Right now, I think the owner's got the better end of it.
After 9.5 years of being in the pressure cooker, the Shark Tank of doing all of this stuff, you decided that you wanted to do something else, and you started the National Football Post. Tell us about that. What that's about, and where you think that's going.
When I left the Packers, interesting investment group got together and talked to me and some other people about. At that time, it was going to be a lot of different things, speaking engagements here, this or that, magazine. Anyway, we said let's focus on one thing, and that one thing was a website where we'll differentiate from all the other football websites, talking from experience. Me being front office, an agent, player, coach, scout, bring that all together in one forum. And we launched 3 years ago, September, and really sort of giving people who are into the sport an inside look at what really goes on. I write about using my experiences from the Packers, from the agent side, from the business side, just giving them an inside look. And it's a lot of flexibility because I can write whatever I want to write about, and I'll write about, why is Drew Brees not getting a contract? Why is Carson Palmer not getting traded? Why did Jordy Nelson sign this contract extension with the Packers? Why did Favre go through what he did? So I'll give my take on things. And, the web business is a tough business in terms of trying to make profitability just through advertising, but we're doing well. We've certainly grown. We've got nice critical acclaim, which I appreciate you saying as well. But we're trying to make it work on the business angle. And it's given me a nice brand to develop into other things as well.
Well, one of those things that you developed is now you're working with ESPN, and you've been doing that ever since about the end of the season,
yes.
The end of the 2010-2011 season. I'm sure people are dying to know, what's that like? I mean, to be there, it's sort of the epicenter for sport in America. It's Disney magic on sports. What's it like to be there?
The first time up there, I equate it to here because I always say I was driving, my first time here, I'm driving down a little residential street, and there's Lambeau. Like, wow, I'm driving down a little residential street, and there's Lambeau Field. Well, in Bristol, Connecticut, I'm driving down a country highway, a country road, there's ESPN. Just right there on a country road. I didn't have a real orientation period. They hired me, and right away we're dealing with this labor situation. We're dealing with the combine, and I just jumped right in. And what was great about people like Chris Mortensen just welcoming and being very accepting of my role. And I was trying and hopefully did give a take on things from experience and breaking down for the average person out there. Some of these concepts are pretty dense and pretty tough to explain. So trying to break it down so everyone can get a good feel for it. And my challenge, what I'm trying to do now after the lockout is, some NBA lockout stuff, but also give them a perspective beyond labor, beyond fighting about contracts, as to what goes on behind the scenes. So hopefully it'll be a long ride at ESPN as well, just giving people a sense of what goes on as a front office agent experience, and now translating that for the media.
Well, I'm sure that when they got started back in '79, they had no idea it was going to turn out to be what it is. So maybe this will too.
Yeah, it's huge, Kevin. It's thousands of employees, and you're just in there, and you see these buildings, after building after building, and it's quite a maze up there.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I hope that you've enjoyed our show. Until next time, I'm Kevin Quinn. Best wishes for good conversations from St. Norbert College.